Thank you so much, Rim, for this kind introduction, and thank you to Pavel and Harris for having this amazing event. I feel like I learned so much and definitely did my assignment of having 5 friends at least. So thank you so much. And today I'll be talking about brain health in the context of climate change and why it's important to at least aspire for carbon neutrality when we think about brain positive economy. So just as Harris had mentioned at the beginning of this event, that when we talk about brain health, we combine neurological and mental health together. And I started my career as a molecular cellular neurobiologist. And when I was training, I was in a lab, this was 15, 20 years ago, and it was to understand the mechanisms that are behind neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease and ALS. And the way I did it was very old school, wear my lab coat, go to the lab, go to the tissue room. If you guys ever been to a biological lab, it's quite a place, party place. And you get your cells, you get these single neurons, and I would put them in a dish, put them under microscope, go through my cellular molecular techniques and try to understand the answers of how these diseases happen, why they happen, and how can we find therapeutic interventions to stop them from where they are. But soon enough, even within my PhD training, I had realized that trying to look in isolation in a very reductionist approach, just what a neuron does, simply didn't answer the question of why some people get these brain disorders, why some don't get, even when they are siblings who carry the same genetic mutations. And it just doesn't answer the whole question of brain health. Because the brain cells themselves, even within our brain, these neurons can be residing with other neuronal cells and non-neuronal cells, and they communicate and they influence each other through inflammatory secretions and so on. And moreover, the brain itself is connected to the body. We know that even certain neurological disorders today, such as Parkinson's disease, may be actually starting in our gut and moving through the gut-brain axis to the brain. So the body constantly speaks to each other, with the brain and the body, and they're very connected. And as we have heard from other speakers today too, that our body definitely gets not only affects the environment, but gets affected by the environment, by the built environment, by the socioeconomic statuses, from what we heard from Joanne and August today, and also from the planetary health. So when we think about brain health, we simply cannot also think about the planetary health, about the body's health. They're all connected. It is really one health. And when we start thinking about the environmental health and planetary health, climate change is this big elephant in the room that, it's really impossible not to see and not to think about. Climate change affects every aspect of human life today. It affects the planet, it affects the biodiversity, it affects our air we breathe and the water we drink and the food we eat. It also affects our health. And it's not, the impacts on the health is not limited to just to our cardiovascular system or our respiratory system, but also our brain, and in a very significant manner. So how does the brain how does the climate change impact the brain? So I lead an international consortium called Neuroclimate Working Group. We have over 70 members from around the world. Some of them are here in person today. Some of them are watching us virtually. Hello. And this is a group of really scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, environmental economists, environmental scientists, climate scientists, but also clinicians, neurologists, psychiatrists, pediatricians who are really concerned about children's health, and also policy experts and public health. We all work at the nexus of climate change and brain health. We have people from 25 countries. Most of them are from lower middle income countries, because climate change does affect these global south the most, and even though they are the ones that contribute least to it. And we think it's really important to get representation from really our goal, our 5-year vision is to have members from every country in the world, because the impacts are so diverse, but equally significant in all parts of the world. And together, one of the things we have been trying to do in the last few months is how can we gather all the evidence through our studies and through the studies of our colleagues, all the scientific evidence that exists around how climate change affects brain health. And we were able to categorize it under 6 climate change-related factors affecting brain health. These are excessive heat, air pollution, extreme weather events, vector-borne diseases, water and soil contamination, and food scarcity and malnutrition. We probably have the most data on excessive heat and the brain. Our brains work really optimally in the perfect conditions, environment, and the temperatures. But anything that deviates from that temperature, the brain starts seeing it as a stress response. And it starts going through oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction and even inflammation. Also, our protective blood-brain barrier starts getting leaky and allowing more toxins as well as inflammatory responses from our body and from our environment to enter our brain. This causes a huge stress response on the brain and affecting its connectivity. It slows down its cognition, and we see its effects on cognition and memory and emotional regulation, among other things. And when we look at observational studies through works of our group members and our colleagues, is that when, for example, on the days of the heat waves, students perform way worse on their exams, or judges in their decisions become much more stringent. We also see violence incidences spike up, as well as murder rates and suicide rates during the heat waves. But these are not only happen acutely. We know that these chronic exposures to excessive heat can have really long-term impacts on our brain and on the cognition, memory, attention, emotional regulation, and social well-being. There's also a lot of data around air pollution and the brain health. Air pollution today affects about 90% of the global population. And we know that it is considered one of the biggest risk factors for stroke, as well as developing Alzheimer's and other dementias. But in fact, air pollution's effects on the brain can be really intergenerational and lifelong. Our group members have been doing these cohort studies for 20, 30 years in different locations, independent studies by them. And these were in Harlem, New York, in Krakow, Poland, and in Bristol, UK. And they had looked at mothers who were pregnant in the 1990s, and they measured the amount of air exposure they were exposed to. And then they studied what happened to those babies who were exposed to air pollution from their mothers over the next 20 years. And what they saw was really striking. Not only these babies were born at much lower weights and prematurely, which really affects their brain development, but they actually had structural changes in their brain, in their corpus callosum, in their gray matter, and these babies had shown then neurodevelopmental delays. They were slower to walk, they were slower to talk, and in the school age, they also showed lower IQ and attention scores, and they had higher risks of being diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And in adolescence, these individuals then had higher risks of developing depression and anxiety and other mental health conditions. So this really shows that the effects of air pollution can be impacting lifelong different populations. And we know that children and the aging population and people with existing neurological and mental health conditions are the most impacted by all these effects of climate change. I won't go into much detail about the other factors, but we know that, for example, extreme weather events. We had Michael talk earlier today about the monkey island, and when this hurricane came and how the monkeys had aged. We see that in real life, with climate change, we have more extreme weather events happening more often, such as wildfires and hurricanes and so on. And these can have really dramatic mental health impacts, especially in the youth, from post-traumatic stress disorder to anxiety to depression. We know that also the climate caused droughts can really impact the crop yields and cause food insecurities that can have huge mental anxiety and depression on people, but as well as in the first 1,000 days of life, malnutrition can be really detrimental to children's brain growth and cause brain stunting. We also know that with the warming waters, more neurotoxic algal blooms may be happening, and also there's an increased spread of vector-borne diseases that can have severe neurological symptoms, such as with the Zika virus and others. Oops, sorry. So these are some of the things we know, but there's a lot of things we don't know. And I will come to the hope, but before I'll scare you a little bit, and then I'll go to the hope, I promise you. But there are a lot of things we don't know. One of the things we don't know is it's easier to study in a lab, a safe lab environment. I think August was talking about the safety of the lab, where we can look at one factor, one cell, and really see what's going on. Or, computer simulations with, for our friends who work on the computers and looking at the population-wide studies, we look at one factor, maybe two factors, but in reality, we are constantly impacted by multiple stressors in our environment. It's the noise pollution, it's the air pollution, it's the water and the soil we have our food and waters are from are filled with microplastics that we don't know what's happening. Maybe Sarah can tell us today in our discussions. And all these different chronic exposures to multiple stressors are also affecting our brains. And our brains are really unique, incredible organs. I may be biased, but they're really incredible. And what's really great about them is that they're very resilient, and they try to retain function at all costs, and they're really good at masking damage. We see that in neurodegenerative diseases all the time. By the time the people with these disorders come to the neurologist's office because their memory lapses are really interfering with their daily lives, and they feel like, okay, something's really wrong, or they keep on falling and they cannot button their shirts, and then they go to the neurologist's office and get diagnosed with Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease. It is actually too late in the disease process. Their disease had already started maybe years, maybe decades ago, and more than 50% of their specific neurons are already dead. So what I'm really scared about this whole scenario is that by the time we start to really see the impact of all these stressors on our brain, maybe from 5-10 years from now, when we see these neurological disorders or mental health disorders really not triple but quadruple and also in populations and affecting much younger populations, it may be too late for many people. So we have to really act now. But there's hope. Our brains are also incredibly neuroplastic. I'm a true believer of neuroplasticity. Given the opportunity, our brains can repair themselves, they can rewire themselves, but we have to give them the opportunity. And so how do we do that? There's many ways, and we can really go on. In our report, we have a whole section on policy recommendations. But one of the ways really is through carbon neutrality. And by lowering the carbon emissions and by clearing, we will clear our air, we will clear our soil, we will clear our water, and also we'll be curbing and slowing down climate change. And these will all give the opportunity for our brains to mend themselves and to be healthier, so then we can have a brain-positive economy. So thank you very much. I look forward to the fireside chat following that.
Thank you, Burcin. Very inspiring and scary at the same time when you see the evidence of the research. And we are all exposed to this every day, so. And everybody is. I would like to call Mark Chambers to join. Yes, hi, Mark. And then we have Sarah Dunlop. She's online, so if we can have her on screen. Thank you very much, Sarah, for joining. I think it's what time there. It's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, probably.
3 in the night.
3.
Oh my God.
It's 3 in the morning.
Oh, thank you very much for being with us. Really, it's great. Okay, we'll not keep you much. we only have 15 minutes, and that's. Sarah, what do you think of what you heard? How do you see the carbon neutrality would be a lever, in fact, to push our brain-positive economy? What is your view of what you heard from Burcin, and what are your views about this?
Okay, so there's a huge echo. Can you still hear me? I have lost all sound. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do hear you.
There's a terrible echo. Okay, so thank you, Burcin, for your amazing talk. Building on that, I mean, my message really is that we need to get to the source of the problem. And at the climate change, we are shattering every single record at the moment. To 2023 was the worst we've ever seen. It was the power of the brain that got us into this terrible mess, and we really need the power of the brain to get us out of it. And we're only going to do that if we stop polluting the planet. And by that, I mean with carbon dioxide and heating it up and all of the heat stroke and increases in neurological symptoms that we see so profoundly. We're only going to do that if we come to our senses and stop polluting the planet and everything living on it. And that will protect our brain health. The other issue I wanted to make that we really have to be clear about is in addition to the carbon dioxide, the additional impost of chemical pollution. Chemicals are being produced at a rate far faster than we can possibly assess or even understand. Hundreds of thousands of them, and they're not regulated. And plastic is a case in point. And we now have very clear evidence that plastic itself, which is smack bang in the middle of the carbon neutrality, because as fast as we are pivoting away to green energy, we are actually making even more plastic. And that's why Tesla can never win, because of plastic. The fossil fuel industry used about 4% of fossil fuel feedstock to make plastic in 2015. It's estimated to go up to about 20% in the coming decades. And we're talking about gigatons. 34 gigatons of the stuff. And 1 gigaton is 10,000 fully laden US aircraft carriers. That's a lot of plastic. But it's not just the microplastics we're concerned about. We hardly know anything about those in human health. We're beginning to measure them, but there's we need to learn how to measure them much better. But it's the chemicals that leach out. That's where we've got the most evidence. And there are something like 16,000 chemicals used in plastic. We've just published a big review, systematic review, umbrella review, showing profound impacts, consistent, statistically significant across our lifespan. I'm talking miscarriage, low birth weight, IQ point loss. It's changing what it is to be human. And the cost of this is absolutely enormous. From just 3 chemicals in the US alone, it was $675 billion. So we have to change the economics. We've heard a lot about that. We cannot go on subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And also there's been some fascinating work actually looking at causal evidence for harm to human health. So autism has gone up staggeringly, far more than we can account for from known risk factors. And what we think is happening is environmental pollution. One example is something called BPA, which you'll have heard of. It's a plastic-associated chemical. Exposure during pregnancy, we now know, in vulnerable boys who have a genetic predisposition to have sluggish testosterone metabolism. In those boys, they have a much higher risk, a 3.5 increased risk of autism by age 2 and 6.5 by age 9. So we are playing with fire here. We are polluting us. We are compromising what it is to be human, and we have to change the entire model. I've been very encouraged by the way we live and by the way we use resources on this planet. I've seen all sorts of positive ideas from this amazing conference. We've just got to come together. We know what to do. We've just got to do it before it's too late.
Thank you very much, Sarah. What you're saying is amazing. And we know it, but why we don't do it? Can you just give some hints on it?
I think we don't do it partly because we're overwhelmed. I mean, we have so many issues to grapple with, but I think we have to. If we don't, the cost is going to be far too big. I mean, I am fearful of a future whereby if we don't do anything, there won't be a sustainable planet. There won't even be an economy because it's all going to be under I don't know how many feet of water, seawater, as the ice caps melt. So Why we don't do it is a mystery to me. Humans seem to be very good at doing these enormous uncontrolled experiments on themselves. I think we've actually got to face up to the root cause of this, the over rampant consumption. We have to change our entire lifestyle, and we have to stop trashing the planet. It is our very life support system, and yet we're destroying it. So I think fear is going to do something. We also need huge incentives to encourage people to actually, I think you've got to get a public revolution going. The people have to say, we're fed up with this. We don't want this inequity anymore. We don't want this grinding poverty, all of these things, so that we really start changing the whole system. That's very broad brush, but I think we need that kind of fundamental change in the way we think and the way we behave on this planet.
Fundamental change, yes, this is what we need. We heard this so many times. We have been saying this to the leaders, and they don't do much. Every year there is a climate summit, and unfortunately there is no action, global action there. And this is the problem. And this year, the climate summit will be in Azerbaijan, and I don't know what it will come out of it. I mean, they focus the whole summit on finance, and let's see what it means in practice after November. Mark, what do you think?
So I'm here to express a certain amount of urgency and accountability, right? I think that there is often a lot of critique around policies, politicians, in terms of their ability to advocate for a certain direction. But we're at a point in time where there is a need for a revolution of doers, makers, people that need to actually put things together in support of implementation. That's the time we're in. I've spent the majority of my career working in climate policy. I was the Chief Sustainability Officer for New York City, same for DC. I've spent time on the first 2 years of the Biden White House on the climate team, directing the work around building emissions. And I can just tell you that there is a lot that's happening, but it's not enough if there aren't people to do things. We can talk as much as we want. There's $27 billion as part of the Inflation Reduction Act that has been released via the Environmental Protection Agency. That $27 billion, called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is the largest, part of the largest climate investment ever made by the US federal government or any government. But it is to fund projects. It's to fund people that are going to implement the things that are going to allow for those large carbon reductions. And so part of the urgency and accountability that I'm here for is to also let you all know that there is a need and there's room for you in this work. And it's actually not possible for this to be sidelined from the rest of the work around brain health, around the rest of the work around our work to understand what it means to make a well-being economy or a care economy. That is absolutely table stakes for what is necessary right now. And fortunately, there are a lot of people that are now trying to do the best they can to be innovative, to be thoughtful, and to use the markets and a lot of the other space around climate technology to do just that. I work for a company, Elemental, that is a nonprofit climate tech investor. We invest in climate technologies across the board to do just that. I mean, every time I was listening to Burcin talk about all those different areas that we need to focus on, and there are companies and there are projects that are ticking down those. A lot of those are going to be in working towards like accessing this federal money as well as local money. So I would say that like all of you are part of communities that have projects, and what is the work that needs to be done to make them better? What is the work that needs to be done to de-risk those projects, not for the benefit of those companies, but for the benefits of the populations that are being served? You know, we talk about, you mentioned extreme heat as being like one of like the big factors, and that is something that is going to outshadow everything else that we talk about in terms of climate risks. You know, it does get hotter and hotter, but it's not just the heat every day, right? There's the delta between daytime temperature and nighttime temperature, the diurnal temperature, it gets smaller and smaller. So that body in the state of stress during the day is also in a state of stress at nighttime. And then the daytime comes again. And so those, when you're not able to move outside of that, you become restless, you become less productive, you become angry, as you mentioned, and then you're not able to fully participate in this great generational work that we need you to be a part of right now. So the science that is how allowing for those of us that have worked in policy and those of us that work in climate technology to solve for things, it needs, you know, a fine point put on it. It needs everyone to be able to allow for us that are making decisions to be able to have the key information, the key details that allow those policies to actually be much more effective and much more specific to meet the needs of a population that we need to desperately galvanize to be a part of confronting the climate crisis.
Thank you, Mark. Burcin, you mentioned there is hope and our brain is resilient. How do you see this hope from a neuroscience perspective?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with Mark, and we had a conversation about this too. I think it's really important in the messaging that we give if we're, when we're talking about the policy space or the science space, to really give out the hope and say that we do need to act on it. There has to be a project. When a lot of what we see right now, especially in the youth, is this eco-anxiety, this feeling of there's nothing I can do, everything's already doomed, and that leads to desperation and inaction. But we have to turn it into, no, we can do something about it. Like Sarah, like you said, that I don't know why we're not doing anything. That there's a lot of players on why we're not doing anything. Even the way our brain is wired, thinks it's a very futuristic problem that doesn't affect it. It will not really realize it. But we can tell the story, the narratives of these lived experiences of it's affecting all of us today. It's affecting our lives, and we can do something about it. There's what we have to act on it now. That urgency that you had mentioned.
Yeah. And that we is important. It's like it's you. Right? You have to do something about it. So there is not this alternate kind of scenario where there are others that are solving for this and we can kind of like point that. There is a role for everyone to play in this work. And if you are involved in the not only the unpacking but the development of the space around brain health, then how are you pivoting that towards working on climate? Like there's no opportunity that you have to be able to stay on the sidelines of that.
So as you mentioned, the time for doers, and we have a lot of doers here. I also look at Shiva. I mean, the EIB is the green bank, and it's the biggest bank worldwide. So, and it's a green bank. They're financing everywhere green projects. I think Minderoo Foundation has done fantastic work on the plastic pollutant in the seas also. And Sarah, you, of course, all the work that all these organizations are doing have to be in the forefront to make a change. I don't know if we have time. Sometimes I wonder whether we have the time. When I come from Barcelona, and the Mediterranean is a hotspot. And I think I'm not sure to what extent the Mediterranean will make it. I always think that the heat waves and the pollution that is in there, I wonder whether it's going to be irreversible. But we will see, time will tell. We keep the hope, as Burcin mentioned. Our brain is resilient, and I think we have survived many civilizations. So thank you very much, Sarah, Mark, and Burcin, for this great quick chat.
Thank you.
And let's hope for action.
Okay, and thank you very much, Rim, for sharing. So now we are going back to living in brain-friendly places. We already had an appetizer for this panel from Upalinanda earlier today. And now I hand over to the great Julie Hiramoto, who is partner at HKS, to take us back into the spaces we want to live in.